Welcome. The following presentation was recorded at the annual Best Practices for Pollinators Summit, hosted by Pollinator Friendly Alliance and the Xerces Society. Please consider participating in the annual summit next year. You can find more about the summit at pollinatorfriendly.org/summit.
There. I'm John Lundgren. I run ECDYSIS Foundation. I also am a farmer and a beekeeper myself. So we are facing a lot of the same issues that the beekeepers are facing. And I'm not going to talk much more about bees, but I am from an indirect perspective. Okay. Uh, the bee problem was never a bee problem. And if we treat the bee problem as just a pollinator issue, then we're never going to get out of this mess. What we're facing right now is a mass extinction event on planet Earth, the likes of which has never been seen before, right? We're facing huge issues that are far-reaching in scale. Climates are changing, human health problems, pollution, civil unrest, declines in biodiversity, and then throw the bees in there, right? And the bees are an excellent example of things like biodiversity loss. The connections of bee health and human health are pretty profound, and so a lot of these issues, I can list these out, and we'll have to do that for farmers. And for a long time, just presenting on these different planetary scale problems. I mean, we're bombarded with this every day. And it's hard to connect with, right? And last year, it became a lot more personal, as we're traveling around the country, as our scientific teams are traveling around the country, we're experiencing many of these issues firsthand. The team just got back on Friday from California almonds. I couldn't get out of the state. All of the passes were closed due to tremendous snowfall that they haven't seen before. We were working in the Central Valley of California in the mud and in the snow. The temperatures in the Central Valley weren't all that different from South Dakota, where we're based. So interesting times we're facing. Interesting times, and really important that we start addressing root causes. The farmers are doing that. They didn't know it, but farmers are doing that. They were just trying to make their businesses work. They didn't know that they were going to be called regenerative farmers, but that's what ended up happening. Farmers all over the world are developing food systems that address some of these planetary scale problems. And what we're finding is that they are also really good for supporting the bees and bee health. And so that really becomes a central part of this whole thing. What is regenerative agriculture? What is it that we're talking about when we bring this topic up? Well, I think, there's 4 central elements to the definition there. Okay, it's soil health. It's promoting life on your farm. It's growing nutritious food with profit. And all of those elements end up becoming really central tenets of what a regenerative farm looks like and is. And then we can start knocking on all kinds of other benefits, like soil carbon accrual and fighting climate changes with our soils, water, reversing desertification that's happening on wide swaths of North America right now, farm resilience and the redevelopment of our rural communities that are slowly being degraded over time, and associated with that would be price premiums and economic benefits, and all of these are wrapped into what a regenerative farm is and does. So, a real challenging aspect of my job is I have to go out to a farm, and when I walk out there, I can usually feel whether or not a farm is regenerative or not. Okay. And with all of my senses, maybe I'm hearing birds, maybe the temperature's cooler or more equilibrated relative to whatever is going on outside of that orchard or field. Maybe it's the bugs that are bouncing off of me, feeling all of these things. And I have to turn that experience into a number, so that we can compare it, right? And determine, is this farm regenerative? Is this one not? One of the challenges behind that is that there's a lot of different practices that end up supporting farming. Maybe it's no-till, maybe it's planting particular covers or compost or rotations or animals of different sorts. But what unifies these different farms is principles. And whether you call it a principle or like I'm going to discuss these things and why it is that they're so important. Regenerative farms have to eliminate tillage. Tillage is ultimately the answer to the bee problem. If you want to save the bees, you have to heal the soil. And the first step in that process is to stop tillage. Tillage is worse than any pesticide that you can apply to your farm or your garden or your world. Okay. It has to start with tillage and eliminating that. Why is that? The fertility of a piece of ground is tied to organic matter, especially, and other micronutrient status within that soil. When you till, you break that organic matter down very rapidly. It gives you a nice big punch that supports crop growth, but over time, those punches get lesser and less, right? And that's the degradation of our natural resource base. There's ways of reincorporating organic matter back into the soil. It requires life, right? Organic matter is life. And we can discuss carbon all day long. Take care of life, grow life on your farm, and carbon will behave itself, okay? So the only way to restore the carbon balance within your soils is with life, and tillage kills that too. So it's this 1-2 punch that takes years to recover from, okay? When you degrade the fertility, when you degrade the productivity of your land due to tillage, you have to replace it, okay? And you replace that with a jug. And it doesn't matter what's on the side of that jug, what name it is, whether it's an insecticide or a fertilizer or an herbicide or a fungicide. Every single one of them kills bees. Okay? The only way out of this mess starts with the soil. Next, you never leave bare soil. That's a really central tenet of regenerative farming. You always have to have living roots in the ground, okay? And the reason for that is that, well, it stops erosion. It provides a skin of protection to your farm and resilience to your farm that's really needed. It also helps to support life, okay? So the only way the productivity of a farm doesn't come from a jug, right? It comes from the sun. And the only way that you can capture that energy from the sun is with plants. So we always have to have plants on the ground doing work for us, right? Really, really important. What do those plants do for bees? Yeah, you're starting to get an idea of why these systems work for bee conservation, right? Plant diversity becomes the next step in this process. This becomes another really essential principle of regenerative farming system. Why is diversity so important? The biological, or the biomass, the abundance, the richness of species of every other organismal group, be it microbes or fungi or insects or birds or whatever, us, is all tied to how many plant species are in a habitat. Okay. More plant species means better nutritional opportunities for bees. A fourth principle, we are not going to get out of this mess on a planetary scale on planetary scale level without animals. Okay, and you don't have to eat animals. That's okay, but you have to understand that well-managed flocks of animals are going to be a really integral tool to this whole equation. What do? They increase the resilience of a farming operation. They provide another revenue stream. But they also are really essential for managing plant communities, cycling nutrients within that system. And you know what? Bees are an excellent source of livestock. Okay, and so I think, in my opinion, bees are a really essential part of this whole regenerative farming system. And then finally, what farmers found, what I found on my own farm, is that once I started adhering to all of these other principles, I don't need to buy all of the jugs. I don't need the agrochemicals anymore, because that natural system does all of the things that those jugs are supposed to be doing, but they do it less efficiently. So we're faced as scientists, and now more and more often, the community is faced with this idea of naming whether or not that farm that you just walked onto is regenerative or not. And so there's a lot of systems for labeling that are evolving right now, certification that are evolving right now. That's a dangerous game. As scientists, we're charged with trying to label, or define treatments. Is this farm regenerative or conventional? And so we kind of had to do that. We had to go through this process of how do you name that? That system, in our opinion, has to be a number of things. And we're the only ones that have ever published on this. So we're the only ones that have ever applied science to naming what a regenerative farm is. This system, in our opinion, has to be simple. It's got to be incorruptible. It's got to scale well from very small gardens all the way up to 1,000-acre farms. It's got to be transferable, and it's got to be replicable. It always has to work. And so we did that. We published on that. We developed a system that is all of these things. It may not be the perfect one, right? We'll change it as we need to. We'll evolve the system, but it's a pretty damn good first try, and it seems to work really well. I'll get into that system a little bit more when I start talking about this 1,000 Farms initiative that we're running right now. But I want to take a step back first and just kind of explain why this is needed. Right now, within regenerative agriculture, there's a lot of success stories. Okay, and those success stories are really important in helping us to define what's possible. But until we replicate those things, until we apply the scientific method to those success stories, it's easy to dismiss them. It's easy to sweep them under the rug. One example is in almonds, and it's fresh in my mind right now because we were just out in the almond orchards, and we had been studying pest management in almonds and regenerative and conventional almonds for a couple of years. And one of our conventional producers, we sat down at the table with them and we showed him the data. He looked at it and he said, "I don't believe it. I don't believe what you're telling me right now. I did everything I was supposed to do. I spray, I followed the university's best management practices. I did what the almond board told me to do. And I sprayed 5 times. I sprayed insecticides 5 times last year. It cost me tens of thousands of dollars. And what you're telling me is that the guy right across the road who didn't spray at all had the same number of pests that I did. And I just can't believe that." And at that point, we told him, okay, let's take a step back. It wasn't just the farm across the road. That's an anecdote that can be dismissed. What we showed him was that this was consistently the case across all of those regenerative farms. That's the power of science. Okay. He changed 100 acres to regenerative the first year, and he changed his entire 1,000-acre operation to regenerative almond production this last year. That's what science can do. Okay, and that's what's really desperately needed right now in this space. Okay, so if we got data, why is that not enough? Right? Shouldn't everybody just automatically be changing? I think right now we are becoming less and less of a data-driven society. I think we're relying on other things that are fundamentally human in trying to transmit information. Maybe it's stories, maybe it's personal experiences, but that isn't data, and that's important to know. So science has to be conducted differently if we want to change behaviors. Scientists, for a long time, we've been trained to keep our blinders on, right? We focus on the data. That's all we do, right? And meanwhile, the world is burning around us because we have never learned to communicate our science to people that need it. That's why your bees are dying still. Okay, there's a lot of good data, but it's written in ways that are impenetrable to somebody that's outside of the field of science. That isn't right. It's based on, so if we want to change behaviors, it requires relationships, it requires trust, it requires face-to-face contact. You know who taught me that? Was the beekeepers. When I was trying to recruit farmers, the beekeepers told me, John, the best way of doing that is face-to-face and shaking hands and meeting those people. And that's how they've gotten their bee yards for years and years and years. So that's what we started to do with our scientific process. So we believe at ECDYSIS Foundation that scientists actually need to be farmers. We actually have to raise bees. We have to do all of these other practices that we're advising on. Okay, we practice what's called relationship intensive science. We are out there meeting the farmers. They get to shake our hands. One of the vineyard operators, I went out, and my graduate student was out on his place, and they were talking, and I went over and introduced myself, and she shook my hand, and she looked at my hand, she said, "Your hands are dirty." And I said, "I'm sorry about that. Yeah, I was just digging." And she's like, "No, that's a good thing." By looking at the calluses on my hands and the dirt under my fingernails, that was not something she was used to experiencing in an academic advisor. Okay, and that changed the dialogue of all of the rest of our interactions from that point on. We deal with systems level science. So we're not just compartmentalizing. I'm going to do a study on varroa mites today, right? I'm not going to just do a study on pesticides today. We look at the system and how all of those different things interplay. Farmer driven. The first step in this process is to understand that the scientist is not the expert. They're not the expert at beekeeping. They're not the expert at farming. All right. The farmers are the experts. And science can be used to help in that situation, but it is in a service role, not as a leadership role. Breaking down borders. So our projects are continental in scale. We do not just work in South Dakota. I was hired with USDA. I was hired as a soybean entomologist. So I got to work on insects in one crop in one region. That was my charge. And that's not how you solve problems that are systemic in nature. That's how you slap band-aids on problems. Okay, yep, those are the regenerative principles. You guys all know that. You know, we're up against a lot of issues right now. We're up against a lot of problems, and it seems absolutely insurmountable. Why on earth are you guys still keeping bees when they die every year, right? And so, I mean, we're a bunch of scientists working out of a pole shed in eastern South Dakota, rural South Dakota, at Blue Dasher Farm. We're good at science. We like that. That's our skill sets. And so we decided, okay, we need bold action. And that's the status quo isn't getting us out of this mess anymore. And so we proposed the largest agricultural experiment that's ever been tried. We're calling it the 1,000 Farms Initiative. What we're trying to do with this is ask the questions: does regenerative agriculture work, no matter what you grow and where you grow it? Does it work in the sense, does it provide on these promises that it makes as far as sequestering carbon out of the atmosphere? Does it reverse desertification? Does it grow species? Does it reverse human health problems? Does it reverse the decline of our rural fabric of our country? So it's answering those questions. And then it's also taking a look. Farmers are developing successful systems. Okay, how did they get there? Can we empirically tease out ways of practices that support this transition in regenerative farming? And so those are the two overarching goals of 1,000 Farms Initiative. This is where we were in 2022. We were on about 400 farms. Our scientific teams deployed from eastern South Dakota out to 400 different farms around the United States. And we're expanding this out this year. We'll be on an additional 500 farms this year. That alone makes it the largest experiment I think that's ever been tried before. I mean, let me put that into context for you. These are the systems, these are the food systems that we investigated last year. We'll be expanding this out for 2023. But you get an idea, each of these systems is experimentally, enough experimental units that it's statistically robust. But you get an idea of the breadth of different systems that we explored. Right. These are the different things that we measured on each of these farms. Okay, so we looked at soil properties. We looked at soil carbon. We took soil cores all the way down to 60 centimeters deep, so a couple of feet down into the ground, so that we could actually see how soil carbon levels were being improved by regenerative practices. We looked at invertebrate communities. We just identified our 1 millionth insect in a pole shed in the middle of South Dakota, the middle of nowhere. We are currently creating one of the largest museum level quality invertebrate collections of our agricultural system that's ever existed. We're digitizing it. We're creating artificial intelligence and image recognition software that will recognize insects and be able to identify them for us. This will literally unlock entomology as a field for bioindicator, like using bioindicators for habitat change. We're looking at water dynamics. How fast does the water go in? How are soils using that water? Plant communities. We conducted 31,000 plant biomass samples last year. We're looking at birds, nutrients of the food products to see if it's more nutritious. We looked at 15,000 different soil cores for microbial communities and identified 3,500 bacterial species and 4,000 species of fungi in these soils. And then we're looking at whether or not it's profitable and does it work as a business model. You know, what got me into this was the bees. I was working in South Dakota. We were doing conservation work and regenerative agriculture work in the Dakotas. And then I said, you know, I have to follow the bees one year and I need to know what it is that they're facing. And so I followed the bees into almond bloom, and this is what I found. There's no question in my mind why the bees are dying, when this is where most of the nation's hives go every year. Only half of them come out. And I knew that simply confronting these issues on a state or regional scale was not going to solve the problem. Our food system, our culture is national or continental in scope. It's international, quite frankly. But we're only conquering one continent at a time. So we talked to the almond board and we explained to them, regenerative agriculture at that time, this was 2018, was a dirty word. Soil health won't work here, is what I was told in the almonds. And so I said, okay, if that's your attitude, that's fine. Get out of the way. And so Tommy Fenster was a master's student, and he was interested in working in California. And I said, well, we've got a project. Why don't you find a few regenerative almond orchards and conventional orchards, and we'll pair them off, and we'll take a look at their systems. And so he did that. He was able to scrounge around, and he found about 16 total orchards, 8 of each treatment over 2 years. And we started looking at these things. This is Tommy's paper that was published on it. It's now in the top 1% of all science ever written in terms of social media impact. So it's been a pretty damn good mastery program. So we took Tommy's early work and we expanded it out. It was an extremely successful project. And in 2020, actually 2021, we started field sampling on phase 2. So we went up and down the Central Valley and we started recruiting farms for it. We're up to about 106 orchards now, half of which are regenerative, actually 2/3 of which are regenerative, about 1/3 of them are conventional as controls for them. And we started deploying teams out to these different orchards. This isn't Photoshop. This is actually almond production, conventional on the right and regenerative on the left. You see some of the practices that support a regenerative system versus a conventional system there. So does this work, right? How are they transitioning? So you get the idea. Okay, so this is some of the data. So this is just almond data, and this is from the first year of the study. We have all of the data in the can for 2022, but I haven't gone through and analyzed it yet. Same patterns are emerging across the system, though. This is very similar to what Tommy found in this original pilot study that was published. You've got about 6 times the ground cover biomass of the plant community. That's really essential. So that's something that regenerative almond production really fosters. Soil organic matter, carbon in the soil ends up being about 30% higher. Like I said, pardon? Like I said, when we're talking about carbon and all of the incentive programs for paying off farmers for sequestering carbon, they need to focus on life, and the carbon will follow itself. I don't think we're going to be having discussions about carbon in about 10 years. It's going to be about life, okay? Life in all of its forms. Water infiltration, they're turning the spigots off out there. Sigma's coming on strong. The farmers, they're pulling orchards out of production. Walnuts are gone, right? I mean, there's no value in them anymore. And so all the walnut orchards are leaving. Almonds are about a quarter of the price of what it was when we started this study. So they're feeling the pinch right now. In the Central Valley was a wetland, and now it's a desert. And that's a direct result of our farming practices. In a desert, it isn't about how much water you get, it's about how much you hold on to. And what we find is that the water is held on to about 6 times better in the regenerative orchards versus the conventional orchards. I can walk into a regenerative orchard and you can feel what the climate of the Central Valley will be in 10 years. It's cool. It can be 110 degrees out in that valley in July. And when you walk onto one of these regenerative orchards, it's 20 degrees cooler. One of our regenerative producers and I were chatting, and he's like, I used 30% of the water that I used 5 years ago in my orchard. This is the answer to the water crisis in California. Microbial life is about double. Okay, that's good. Microbes are really important for cycling nutrients. They're a source of making that fertility in that orchard. Okay, really important. Invertebrates are about 6-fold more abundant. And the data on that's still rolling in, but the pest populations are exactly the same. So you don't end up losing to pests just because you stop using all of your insecticides and fungicides. Birds are about 30% greater. And actually, over the 3 years, me and our ornithologist, Casey Jensen, were chatting about it. He was just out there. I think it's double now, at least double what we're seeing in the conventional. So this change is starting to exacerbate over time. It's really wonderful to watch. And those birds are good storytellers, right? People love them. So they love talking about bees. They love and then the ground mammals, voles and gophers out there are a real problem. And we find that gophers are significantly reduced in the regenerative orchards. Nutrient density, we just sent off our almonds from these different systems. We're partnering with the American Heart Association and Rockefeller Foundation as part of their periodic table of food initiative in order to generate full nutrient profiles. They're looking at phytochemicals that we never even knew existed. All of the omics, metabolomics, ionomics, proteinomics, lots of things. And for each of these almond samples, we'll be getting about 1,700 different nutrient profiles. So really, really valuable. That's going to be a game changer. And then at this point, we're looking at profits and losses. And at this point, based on Tommy's preliminary analysis, and we haven't done all the economics from the phase 2 yet, but from Tommy's work, it's about twice as profitable. And the reason for that doubling in profit is premiums in Almond's case. But it's important to note that even if the premiums weren't there, the regenerative would be just as profitable as the conventional. And so you're not losing money by going regenerative. And we have found this in other systems as well. Okay. So yes, this becomes, you get an idea just by looking at the almond work. Imagine that on an additional, times 10 or times, actually, in this case, times 20 over the first 2 years of the study. It becomes this experimental spine for revolutionizing our food system. Unprecedented collaborations that could come from this. We're calibrating modeling efforts to try to understand the impact of our food system on climate and water. We're developing entirely new technologies to be able to unlock this experiment, or to unlock and measure the environment that we're working. So really, really powerful opportunities for collaborations. So what have we learned? If we change to regen in almonds, we could sequester about 10.4 million tons of carbon in the soil while making almond producers more profitable. Going regenerative, you don't lose money, right? In fact, you probably double your profits on average. The climate is just different. This is the answer to Sigma. The only answer to California's water crisis is this. There's no other way of getting out of this. And there may be other ways of knocking on or making decisions to help support California in its water crisis. But without this, we're screwed. Okay. You know, it feels so challenging, right? It feels overwhelming, all of the problems that we're bombarded with all of the time. Okay. All it takes is one pebble to start an avalanche. And at ECDYSIS Foundation, we are trying to be that pebble. And on this teleconference right now, I see a lot of pebbles out there. And I urge and implore you to please start an avalanche in your own lives. I wouldn't be able to do this without an amazing staff of young and enthusiastic scientists. You know, as I said, we're bombarded with problems every day. And gosh, it just seems like my whole life we've been hit with all of these issues, right? And it's just crippling. And we're sitting on this battlefield and we're losing. And we are squinting at the horizon looking for some sign of hope. And the staff at ECDYSIS Foundation, what I see is the cavalry is starting to assemble. And they are not taking this mess lying down. They're going to fix this, okay? If you would like to learn more about what it is that we're trying to do with this crazy group and team and initiative, please look us up. 501c3 is ECDYSIS Foundation. You can give your money to the government or you can give it to us. It's up to you. Blue Dasher Farm is where we practice. And so look up our social media, follow us on Twitter. If you know of farmers that need to be a part of this, please let us know. We give each of these farms $7,500 worth of free information about their operation, and we do it for free. So please, and if you happen to be have the means, support these farms. We work with sponsors, so that's